It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend road trip, a quick escape from the noise of everyday life. But everything changed in a single horrifying moment when the Andrews family's SUV skidded off a remote mountain road and plunged into a hidden ravine. Mangled metal, shattered glass, and the deafening silence of the forest became their world. With no phone signal, no food, and no way to climb out, they were forced to confront a brutal reality. Survival would depend on instincts they never knew they had. Over the next 9 unimaginable days, the family battled hunger, pain, and fear, relying only on insects, tree sap, and their faith that someone, anyone, would find them before it was too late. This is the extraordinary story you are about to witness. Before we dive deeper into this gripping survival tale, I'd love to know, from which city and country are you watching this story right now? Drop it down below in the comments. I truly enjoy seeing our community from all around the world. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe, leave your like, and share this video, because your support helps us bring more powerful, inspiring, and emotional stories like this one. Now, let's continue. The early hours after the crash were a blur of confusion and pain. Michael Andrews, the father, regained consciousness first. His ears rang, his vision wavered, and a sharp sting pulsed through his ribs. But what terrified him most wasn't his own injuries. It was the silence where his family should have been. With trembling hands, he forced himself through the twisted interior of the SUV, calling out for his wife, Anna, and their 2 children, Lucas and Emma. A groan, a faint cry, a small movement. Relief mixed with horror flooded him as he found them alive but badly hurt. The ravine around them was steep, dense, and suffocatingly quiet. They were trapped, and no one knew they were there. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the forest transformed into a hostile world. The family had no food, only half a bottle of water, and no fire. Every shadow felt threatening. Every rustle in the brush sent chills through the children's spines. Michael tried everything, shouting for help, attempting to climb the jagged slope, using broken pieces of metal as makeshift tools. But the ravine walls crumbled under his weight. They were isolated, injured, and freezing. It was then that Anna whispered the words that would guide them through the darkest moments. "We stay together. We survive together. God is with us." And from that moment on, their struggle wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. By the 3rd day, hunger clawed at their strength. Desperation pushed Michael to explore the ravine floor, where he discovered the only edible things around. Insects hiding under rotting bark, and droplets of thick sap oozing from the trees. It wasn't food anyone ever wanted to eat, but it was something. With determination he didn't know he possessed, he brought back what little he found, sharing it equally with his family. The taste was bitter, the texture repulsive, but each bite was a reminder that they were still fighting, still holding on, still believing that their story wasn't meant to end there in the shadows of the ravine. And as the days passed, exhaustion grew. But so did their faith that rescue was on its way. Long before their world was turned upside down, the Andrews family had always cherished simplicity. Michael and Anna believed that the greatest memories were not made in crowded cities or expensive resorts, but in quiet places where nature whispered its peace. Their children, Lucas and Emma, grew up loving camping trips, long drives through the countryside, and the thrill of discovering new landscapes. And so, when Michael suggested a weekend getaway into the mountains to celebrate Emma's recent school achievement, no one hesitated. They packed lightly, laughed as they loaded the SUV, and began a journey that felt like any other, full of hope, closeness, and the comfort of being together. Little did they know that this trip would test the limits of their strength and unity in ways they could never have imagined. The first hours of the drive were filled with music, playful arguments between the siblings, and the soft hum of the engine cutting through the winding road. Anna watched the sun filtering through the treetops as they climbed higher into the mountains, feeling grateful for moments like this, moments that reminded her of how blessed they were. But the road soon became narrower, the turns sharper, and visibility more difficult as the forest thickened around them. Still, there was no fear. Michael had driven through mountain roads countless times, and his confidence reassured everyone. What they didn't expect, however, was the sudden patch of gravel loosened by recent rains, waiting like a silent trap just around the bend. The moment the tires lost traction, everything changed. The laughter stopped. The SUV lurched violently as Michael fought for control. Screams filled the cabin as the vehicle skidded across the slick dirt and broke through a weak guardrail. The world spun into chaos, trees, sky, and earth blending into a blur as the SUV tumbled down the ravine. When the motion finally ceased, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Dust floated through the broken windows, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Every second that passed felt eternal, as each family member drifted between consciousness and darkness. It was in that fragile stillness that the reality of their situation began to sink in. Rescue was not coming, not quickly at least. The ravine was deep, hidden, and far from any main road. Their SUV was invisible to anyone passing above. The Andrews family had always believed in the importance of being prepared, but no amount of preparation could have accounted for the severity of their injuries, the isolation, or the harshness of the wilderness they now faced. As Michael took in the scene, shattered metal, twisted branches, blood, bruises, and fear, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him like never before. The father he had always tried to be was now the lifeline his family desperately needed. And failure was simply not an option. Yet, even in the midst of devastation, a quiet determination began to form within each of them. They were hurt, yes. Terrified, absolutely. But they were together. And that single truth gave them a foundation to cling to. The Andrews family had always been guided by faith, and in that hidden ravine, surrounded by shadows and uncertainty, their belief became more than a comfort. It became their fuel. They prayed not only for rescue but for strength, clarity, and unity. They prayed because they knew that, in the days ahead, hope would be their most valuable resource. And as the sun rose on their first morning after the crash, they made an unspoken promise. They would do everything in their power to survive, no matter how desperate the circumstances became. When I opened my eyes that first morning after the crash, for a moment, I didn't know where I was. All I could see was the dull gray sky peeking through the canopy and the dewy leaves above me. My body felt heavy, as if pinned down by an invisible weight. Then the sharp pain in my ribs returned, and everything came rushing back. The skid, the scream, the violent tumble, and the silence that followed. I turned my head and saw the mangled remains of our SUV resting sideways between two thick trees. Glass glimmered across the ground like frost. It wasn't a nightmare. We were still there. We were still trapped. And somewhere within that wreckage were Anna, Lucas, and Emma. My entire world. Anna. My voice cracked as soon as I tried to call out. Panic tightened around my chest. For a few agonizing seconds, I listened for any sign of movement, any sound that told me my family was still alive. Then I heard a soft, strained reply. Michael, I'm here. Relief hit me so hard my eyes burned. I crawled toward her, stumbling over broken branches and metal scraps. She lay halfway outside the crushed passenger door, bruised, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but conscious. Thank God, I whispered, placing my hand on hers as gently as I could. She nodded weakly, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. The kids, she breathed. Check them. I forced myself to move quickly, despite the pain shooting through my side. Lucas was still strapped in the back seat, his legs pinned under a collapsed section of the roof. His face was pale, but he was breathing. When I touched his shoulder, his eyes fluttered open, full of confusion and fear. Dad, what happened? He murmured. I swallowed hard. We crashed, son. But you're here with us. You're alive. I freed his legs carefully, every groan leaving his lips slicing at my heart. Emma was on the opposite side, curled against the shattered window. When I reached her, she let out a faint cry, more from fear than pain. I gathered her into my arms, holding on longer than she probably understood. In that moment, I felt God's mercy. We were broken, but we were together. The ravine looked even more menacing in daylight. The walls were steep, lined with loose dirt and sharp rocks that crumbled under the slightest pressure. Tall trees towered over us like silent giants. No road was visible from where we were, no trail, no sign of human presence at all. We were deep, much deeper than I realized during the chaos of the fall. I walked the perimeter, trying to find any possible way out, but every path led to the same answer. Climbing out without proper equipment was impossible. If we were going to be rescued, someone had to notice we were missing. Someone had to search. And until then, we were on our own. Food was the next concern. Our cooler had burst open during the crash, launching everything down the ravine. The only thing I found intact was half a bottle of warm water wedged under a seat. It wasn't enough, not for 4 people, not for long. When I returned to Anna, she looked at me as though she already knew the answer. "Nothing?" she whispered. I shook my head. Not yet. The children watched us with wide, silent eyes, trying to understand just how serious things were. I kept my voice steady when I spoke to them, even though inside fear twisted itself like a knot. "We'll figure it out," I said. "We're going to take this one step at a time." Pain made everything harder. My ribs throbbed with each breath, and Anna's right arm hung at an unnatural angle that suggested a fracture. Lucas limped when he tried to stand, and Emma clung to Anna's uninjured side, trembling. I tore fabric from the car seats and fashioned makeshift bandages for the more urgent wounds. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was something. I kept reminding myself, stay calm, stay focused, stay faithful. The moment panic took over, everything would crumble. I had to be the anchor, even when I felt like I was barely holding myself together. Later that afternoon, I ventured deeper into the ravine, searching for anything that could help us. Food, water, shelter, anything. The air was thick with humidity, and insects buzzed relentlessly around me. I hated what I found, hated the thought of telling my family. But the truth was unavoidable. The forest offered only what nature provided. Beneath fallen logs, I discovered beetles and small clusters of larvae. On several trees, thick, amber-colored sap dripped slowly like hardened tears. I stared at it for a long time, wrestling with disgust and desperation. This wasn't survival the way movies portrayed it. This was real, raw, unforgiving. But we needed sustenance. Even the smallest amount might keep us going one more day. When I returned with my grim collection, Anna didn't recoil. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, understanding the weight of my decision. "We'll manage," she whispered, her voice steadier than I expected. We gave the children only what they could tolerate, a bit of sap for energy, a few tiny insects hidden in crushed leaves so the texture wouldn't scare them too much. They were brave, braver than I had any right to expect children to be. And though tears welled in their eyes, they ate it because they trusted us, because they wanted to believe we were going to make it. As evening approached, the temperature dropped sharply. The forest that looked calm in daylight transformed into something cold and unfamiliar. I gathered branches and scraps from the wreckage to create a barrier around us, hoping it would keep out the wind and any curious animals. We huddled together, sharing body heat, listening to the forest's unsettling noises, cracking branches, distant cries, the subtle shift of unseen creatures. Emma buried her face in Anna's shoulder. Lucas pressed closer to me, trying to be brave. And as we sat there, wrapped in darkness, I prayed silently, begging God for strength, for guidance, for a sign. Before drifting into an uneasy sleep, I looked at my family, battered, cold, terrified, yet still breathing. And something ignited inside me, a conviction I couldn't fully explain. I didn't know how long we would be there or when help would arrive. But I knew this. Giving up was not an option. Every sunrise would be another chance to fight, every breath another reminder that God had not abandoned us. And as long as I had breath in my lungs, I would do everything in my power to lead my family out of that ravine alive. The second day began with a dull ache in every part of my body. My back throbbed from sleeping on the cold, uneven ground, and the bruise across my ribs had deepened into a dark, angry purple. But the pain didn't matter. What mattered was the look on my family's faces as they slowly woke up, exhausted, hungry, and unsure of what the new day would demand from us. Emma clung to Anna immediately, her small hands trembling. Lucas tried to sit upright but winced when his injured leg refused to cooperate. I forced a smile, the kind you give your children when they need reassurance even if you don't have any to offer. "Morning," I said softly. We made it through the night. The words felt thin, but they were the only comfort I had to give. Our water was nearly gone. Only a small sip remained in the plastic bottle, and we agreed to save it for emergencies. That decision weighed heavy on me. I could deal with hunger, but watching my family thirst was a different kind of torture. Anna's lips were dry and cracked, and the kids kept licking theirs without realizing it. "We need to find water today," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I nodded, even though dread settled in my stomach. The ravine floor was damp in some areas, but not enough to collect. We had seen no streams, no puddles, nothing. Still, I promised her, and myself, that I would find something. Leaving them to rest, I ventured deeper into the ravine than the day before. The terrain became more rugged, with thick roots crossing my path and steep mounds of earth making every step painful. My ribs screamed in protest, but I pushed forward. The forest was dense, the air humid. Sweat mixed with dried blood on my skin. I listened for the sound of trickling water, for anything resembling hope. Minutes stretched into an hour, then two. I kept climbing over fallen trunks, pushing through thorny branches that scraped my arms. Finally, I spotted a cluster of white fungus growing on a rotting log. Moist, soft, and damp. Not much, but moisture meant possibility. I pressed the fungus carefully and droplets of water seeped out. I whispered a prayer of thanks. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't plenty, but it was something. I squeezed every drop into a leaf I folded into a cup shape, then collected more from surrounding logs. It took nearly an hour to gather what amounted to only a few mouthfuls, but in that moment it felt like treasure. When I returned, Anna's eyes filled with relief. The kids leaned forward eagerly as I passed the leaf to Emma first. She sipped it, then handed it to Lucas, who drank slowly, savoring every drop. Anna and I shared the rest. It tasted earthy and bitter, but it revived us just enough to push forward. Food, however, remained a brutal challenge. I spent part of the afternoon searching again, overturning rocks, and digging into old bark with a broken piece of metal. Insects scattered across my hands, slimy larvae, beetles, pale grubs. These were things no parent ever imagines giving their children, but desperation changes everything. When I returned to Anna with my small handful, she simply nodded and helped divide them. We tried not to react to the texture or the crunch. I kept telling myself, this is fuel, nothing more. Survival over comfort. But as the kids chewed, trying not to cry, I felt the weight of failure pressing on my chest. I should have protected them from this. I should have kept them safe. Instead, I was feeding them insects like some cruel test of endurance. The heat of the day drained the little energy we had left. By late afternoon, the exhaustion became overwhelming. Emma fell asleep in Anna's lap, her cheeks streaked with dirt. Lucas leaned against me, his breaths shallow but steady. Anna watched me with tired eyes that reflected both strength and vulnerability. "Michael," she said gently, "don't blame yourself." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because deep down, guilt had already woven itself into my thoughts. I should have seen the gravel. I should have slowed down. I should have... so many things. But she reached for my hand with her uninjured one and squeezed. "We're alive because of you," she whispered. Don't forget that. As evening approached, clouds formed overhead, painting the sky with shades of grey and purple. The air grew cooler, heavy with the promise of rain. At first I felt relief. Rain meant water, but the thought quickly twisted into worry. If the rain was too heavy, the ravine could flood, or rocks could loosen and fall from above. We weren't just vulnerable, we were exposed. I gathered what branches and scraps I could find to build a small shelter against the ravine wall, using the SUV's broken door as a makeshift roof. It wasn't sturdy, but it offered some protection. We huddled beneath it, holding on to each other as the first drops began to fall. The rain was icy, and the wind howled as it swept through the ravine. Water dripped through gaps in our shelter and soaked our clothes. I tried to collect some of it in pieces of plastic and broken containers from the SUV, but the downpour was too scattered. Still, we managed to catch enough to hydrate ourselves. The children shivered in our arms, and Anna leaned her head on my shoulder, her breathing slow and deliberate. "Keep them warm," she whispered. I wrapped my arms around the kids, pulling them close to shield them from the cold. In moments like that, I felt both strong and helpless at the same time. Strong for holding them together, helpless because I couldn't stop the storm. When the rain finally slowed, the sky had darkened to a deep navy blue. The forest sounds returned, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves shifting in the wind, the quiet drip of water falling from branch to branch. The air felt fresher, but the cold seeped into our bones. We sat in silence, too tired to speak. I prayed silently, asking God for protection through the night, for strength to face tomorrow, for a miracle, any miracle. I didn't ask for rescue, not directly. I simply asked for another day with my family alive. That alone felt like a blessing. Before we lay down to rest, Anna looked at me in the dim light, her eyes reflecting something deeper than fear. Faith. "Michael," she said softly, "we will make it." I believe that. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. But hearing her say those words breathed new strength into my weary heart. We arranged ourselves close to one another beneath the fragile shelter, listening to the last soft drops of rain. And as I closed my eyes, holding my family close, I made myself a silent promise. Tomorrow, I would search farther, climb higher, fight harder, because hope may have begun to fade, but it was not gone. And as long as even a trace of it remained, I would not stop fighting for us. By the third morning, the forest felt heavier, as though the trees themselves were leaning in to watch our every move. Hunger gnawed at our stomachs with a sharpness that was becoming unbearable. The insects we had eaten the day before had provided just enough energy to keep us conscious, but not enough to truly sustain us. Lucas walked beside me with his shoulders slumped, and Emma clung to Anna's hand, her little steps slow and unsteady. I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing harder than ever on my chest. I kept replaying the crash in my mind, wondering if I could have done something, anything different to protect them. But regret couldn't guide us out of this wilderness. Only perseverance could. And faith, always faith. The sun rose through a veil of mist, turning the air around us into something almost dreamlike. But there was no beauty in what we were living. It felt cruel, almost mocking. I searched for any fruit-bearing tree, anything that might give us a few calories, but every attempt ended in disappointment. "Dad, I'm dizzy," Lucas whispered, his hand gripping my arm to steady himself. I crouched in front of him, placing a hand on his cheek. His skin was too warm, signs of dehydration were beginning to appear. "Just breathe," I told him softly. "We'll find water soon." I didn't know if that was true, but I needed him to believe it. I needed me to believe it. When we reached a small clearing, we decided to rest for a moment. Anna sat with Emma on her lap, brushing leaves from her hair. Emma's eyes drooped sleepily, her lips dry and pale. Anna looked at me with that silent question she didn't want to voice. How much longer can they last? I didn't answer with words. Instead, I squeezed her hand gently. "Michael, we need something soon," she whispered. I nodded. Every time I looked at them, My family, tired and trembling from weakness. I felt a fire burning inside me, pushing me to search harder, walk farther, ignore my own pain. Losing hope was not an option. We moved again, following the faint slope of the land downward, hoping it would lead us toward some type of stream. My ears stayed alert for the sound of moving water, but the forest around us hummed only with insects and distant birds. Suddenly, a rustle came from the bushes. Lucas flinched, grabbing my arm. I slowly lifted a broken branch, holding it like a makeshift weapon. For a moment, everything went silent. Then a small monkey leaped from the branches and disappeared deeper into the woods. My breath rushed out in relief, but the encounter reminded me of how vulnerable we were, how easily anything could turn from a minor scare into a real threat. The ground soon became uneven and covered with thick vines. Emma stumbled, and Anna caught her before she fell. "Mommy, I'm thirsty," she murmured. Hearing that broke something inside me. I scanned every direction, desperate for any sign of water. That was when Lucas pointed toward a cluster of trees in the distance. "Is that smoke?" he asked. My heart jumped. I narrowed my eyes. At first I saw nothing, but then a thin trail rose between the canopy branches. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people, and people meant hope. "Come on," I urged, suddenly filled with new energy. "Let's check it out, carefully." We moved faster than we had in hours, though every step felt like walking against a current. As we approached the source of the smoke, the smell of burning wood grew stronger. My heart pounded both with excitement and caution. What if it wasn't rescuers? What if it was another threat? But when we finally reached the area, my stomach dropped with disappointment. The fire had been small, likely from a lightning strike the night before. A charred, fallen log still smoldered faintly, but it belonged to no camp. There were no footprints, no tools, no signs of anyone living there. Lucas exhaled shakily, his shoulders deflating. I placed an arm around him. "It's all right," I murmured, though the bitter sting of crushed hope cut deep. Still, the burned log offered something unexpected. Tree sap, thick and amber-colored, dripping slowly along the bark. I scraped some with my fingers and examined it. Sticky, slightly sweet, and edible. "This can help," I said, showing Lucas. He hesitated, but hunger overcame doubt. We gathered what we could, sharing small portions between the four of us. It wasn't satisfying. It barely counted as food, but it gave us enough energy to keep moving. Watching Emma lick the sap from her fingers with a faint smile nearly made me cry. It reminded me how simple survival becomes when everything else is stripped away. As we continued walking, the forest began to change again. The terrain angled upward, and the air felt slightly cooler. The trees grew taller, thicker, casting deep shadows across the ground. Lucas walked close to me, occasionally leaning against my arm when his legs trembled. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think the rescuers are looking for us?" I stopped for a moment, turning to face him. "Yes," I said firmly, "I know they are, and we are going to keep moving until they find us." He nodded, though fear still lingered in his eyes. He was trying to be brave, for me, for his mother, for Emma. But I could see the exhaustion wrapped around him like a heavy coat. By late afternoon, fatigue hit us all at once. We stopped beneath a large tree whose roots created a natural bench. Anna and Emma sat while Lucas and I scouted a bit ahead. Then, something far away echoed through the trees, so faint I thought I imagined it. A low, rumbling sound. I froze. Lucas looked at me. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded slowly. The sound came again. A helicopter. My pulse sped up. "Come on." I grabbed Lucas's hand and rushed back to Anna and Emma. "They're close," I said breathlessly. "We need to get to higher ground so they can see us." We climbed as quickly as our weakened bodies allowed, pushing through vines, roots, and thick brush. But the sound began fading, drifting away from us. When we reached a rocky outcrop with a partial view of the canopy, the helicopter was already a distant speck. Then nothing. Anna covered her mouth, tears streaming. Lucas stared upward, jaw tight. I felt the crushing weight of it too. The agony of hope slipping through our fingers just when it felt closest. But I forced myself to breathe. "They're searching," I said softly. "That means they're not giving up, and neither are we." Exhausted, starving, thirsty, terrified, we stood there together, holding on to the only thing we had left. The promise that God was still leading us, even when rescue flew just out of reach. By the time the fourth day arrived, exhaustion had woven itself so deeply into my bones that even lifting my feet felt like I was dragging weights through the underbrush. My stomach twisted painfully from the polluted water we had been forced to drink, and I could tell Lucas was fighting the same battle. He tried to hide it, he always did, but every now and then I'd catch him pressing a hand against his abdomen, hoping I wouldn't notice. The forest around us seemed darker than usual, not because the trees had grown thicker, but because our minds had grown heavier. I felt that thin thread of optimism starting to fray. Still, I couldn't let Lucas see that. A father's eyes must remain steady, even when his heart trembles. So I kept my chin up, inhaled deeply, and pushed forward, praying silently that God would carry us where our strength no longer could. We followed a narrow ridge that morning, climbing over moss-covered rocks that glistened with dew. Each stone felt slippery, each step dangerous. Lucas walked ahead of me, slower than usual. His arms hung tiredly at his sides, and his breathing had a rattling sound that worried me. I wanted to tell him to rest, to sit for a moment, but I knew stopping too often would only drain us more. "Dad," he murmured at one point without turning back, "my legs feel weird." I hurried to catch up, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. His skin was hot, too hot, fever. My chest tightened. The contaminated water was taking its toll. I swallowed my panic and told him we just needed to reach the valley below, where I hoped we might find a clearer stream. Whether that was true or just wishful thinking, I couldn't be sure. But I needed Lucas to believe we had a destination. When we finally descended the ridge, the ground became softer, and the forest floor opened into a wide stretch of ferns. A faint breeze moved through them, creating a ripple effect like waves passing over a green sea. Lucas sat down without asking permission, his head dropping between his knees. I knelt beside him, listening to his uneven breaths. "It's all right," I whispered, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "We're going to get through this." He nodded weakly, though his eyes were glazed with a mixture of dehydration and fever. I took the last bit of water we had saved, still cloudy, still dangerous, and handed it to him. "Just a sip," I said. He obeyed. As I watched his trembling hands, a painful question echoed in my mind. How much more could he endure? How much more could I? But even as doubt crept in, something deeper stirred beneath it, a stubborn refusal to give up. We pressed forward again, though slowly now, with Lucas leaning against me for balance. The sun above us shifted behind the thick canopy, casting strange shadows that danced with our movements. At one point, we heard something rustling behind a cluster of trees. I stopped immediately, tightening my grip on Lucas. A boar? A jaguar? The jungle didn't owe us safety. I scanned the foliage until the noise faded, swallowed by silence. "Don't worry," I told Lucas, though my heart was still racing. But danger wasn't just the wildlife. It was our own weakening bodies. Several times Lucas stumbled, and each time I caught him, feeling his weight grow heavier. "You're doing great," I kept telling him, not because he needed the words, but because I needed to say them. We anchored each other with small reassurances that felt like drops of hope in a desert of fear. By late afternoon, clouds gathered above us again, thick and metallic. The pressure in the air pressed against my temples, warning of another storm. And when the first drops of rain finally fell, they didn't bring relief. They brought dread. This wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a downpour that hammered through the forest with violent force. In seconds, the ground became mud. Tree branches whipped under the weight of the wind. I pulled Lucas beneath a fallen trunk that formed a small natural shelter, barely enough to shield us from the worst of it. He shivered violently, and I realized the fever was worsening. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, letting my body heat shield him from the cold. "Dad, are we going to make it?" he asked, his voice trembling not just from the chill but from the fear he had tried so hard to hide. My throat tightened. "Yes," I answered immediately. "We are. God hasn't brought us this far to abandon us now." And in that moment, I believed those words with everything in me. The rain pounded for what felt like hours. I stared out at the sheets of water falling from the sky, wondering if there was a message hidden in all of this chaos. Sometimes trials feel like storms, sudden, overwhelming, impossible to understand. And yet, storms also cleanse. They force roots deeper, reshape landscapes, and call life to grow in unexpected places. As I held Lucas close, I felt the weight of that spiritual truth settle inside me. Maybe this wasn't punishment. Maybe it was transformation. Maybe, in some strange way, this forest was breaking us in order to rebuild us stronger. Lucas rested his head against my chest, breathing slowly now, and despite everything, a strange peace washed over me. Not comfort. Peace. The kind that comes from surrendering to something greater than fear. When the storm finally eased, the forest looked different. The air felt fresher, cooler. Puddles shimmered beneath the trees, reflecting shards of the fading sunlight. I helped Lucas stand, and though he wobbled, he managed to take a few steps. "Look," he whispered suddenly, pointing toward a sloping patch of land. I followed his gaze, and my heart nearly burst. At the bottom of the slope, a small stream wound its way between rocks, its water clearer than anything we had seen in days. I blinked twice to be sure it wasn't a hallucination. Without another word, we moved toward it, sliding down the muddy incline with clumsy urgency. The sight of that water, cold, transparent, rushing gently, felt like witnessing a miracle. For the first time in days, I felt hope return like a rising tide. We fell to our knees at the bank of the stream. I cupped the water in my hands and brought it to Lucas first. "Slowly," I warned. "Your stomach needs time." He nodded and drank greedily but carefully. Then I drank, letting the icy liquid wash away the dryness in my throat. It tasted clean, pure, like grace itself. For several minutes we simply stayed there, drinking, breathing, recovering. I washed Lucas's face, cooling his fevered skin. As life seeped back into us, I closed my eyes and whispered a trembling prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Father. Thank you for bringing us here." Because it was impossible not to see the divine in that moment. After all the wandering, the confusion, the sickness, here was provision, perfectly placed and perfectly timed. With renewed strength, we followed the stream downstream, allowing its winding path to guide us. Lucas walked with steadier steps now, though still weak, but his eyes looked brighter, more focused. "Dad," he said quietly as we walked, I think God heard us." I nodded, though emotion thickened my voice too much for words. Perhaps challenges break us down only so that faith can be rebuilt stronger, brick by brick. And in that forest, far from civilization, surrounded by towering trees and the unknown, I realized that faith wasn't just something you held on to. It was something that held on to you when your strength ran out. Every step we took along that stream felt carried. As evening settled and the sky darkened once again, we stopped beneath another large tree, this one with thick roots that curled naturally into a protected alcove. Lucas lay beside me, resting peacefully for the first time in days. I watched him, marveling at his resilience, his courage, his quiet strength. I felt battered, exhausted, humbled, but also grateful beyond measure. The forest had tested us, broken us, frightened us, yet it had also taught us. And though I didn't know what the next day would bring, I knew one thing for certain. We were no longer surviving on desperation alone. We were surviving on faith, steady, unwavering, alive. And with that truth warming my chest, I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, We'll make it home, Lucas. I promise. I woke before sunrise on our 9th day in the ravine, my body stiff, my tongue dry, and my thoughts drifting like smoke between exhaustion and determination. Sarah was curled beside Lily, her arm wrapped protectively around our daughter, whose small frame trembled with the morning chill. The ache in my stomach was sharper now, a hollow twisting that felt like it might fold me in half. But I pushed myself upright, because today felt different. I didn't know why. Maybe it was desperation, maybe instinct, but something inside whispered that our chance was coming. The ravine felt quieter than usual, the wind gentler, almost expectant. I stood there in the muted dawn light, praying silently that this would be the day we found a way out, or the day someone found us. I stepped away from our shelter of leaning branches and flat rocks, stretching my sore legs. My mind replayed everything I had done wrong, the wrong turn on the trail, the moment the rockslide trapped us, the days I struggled to find edible insects, the nights I prayed Lily's body would hold on just a little longer. Guilt had become a second skin, but I couldn't allow it to paralyze me. I walked toward the ridge I had been attempting to climb for days, studying its jagged edges once more. If I could just find a better grip. If I could just reach a higher point. Maybe I could catch a signal or spot a rescue team. The thought reignited a spark in me. I turned back to our little shelter and saw Sarah watching me with tired but hopeful eyes. "Try again?" she asked, her voice raspy. I nodded. "I won't stop trying." She gave me a small, weary smile that tightened something in my chest. She trusted me, even after everything. That alone gave me the strength to try again. I returned to the ridge and pressed my hands against the cold rock. My knuckles were already scraped raw, but I forced myself upward, inch by inch. My boots searched for footholds, slipping more than gripping. Several times I had climbed this far, only to be forced back down by loose rock or my weakening muscles. But something inside me kept insisting. Just try one more time. When I reached a point where the rock narrowed, I stopped to catch my breath. My heart pounded hard, not only from exertion but from the dread of falling. A fall here could end everything. I pushed myself another few feet higher, ignoring the burn in my arms. Then, suddenly, a sound broke the stillness, a low thumping, faint but unmistakable. I froze. At first I thought it was my heartbeat echoing in my ears. But no, this was rhythmic, mechanical, growing louder. I dug my fingers deeper into the rock and lifted my head toward the sky. A helicopter. It was distant, but real. My breath hitched, emotion crashing into me so violently that my grip almost slipped. I pressed myself against the rock and screamed as loudly as my cracked throat allowed. "Sarah, Lily, a helicopter!" But I knew they wouldn't hear me over the thumping blades. I had one chance, one desperate, reckless chance. I reached for the last stretch of the ridge, pushing my body beyond its limits. My arms shook violently, my boots scraped against loose stone, but I climbed anyway. And then, with one final shove, I pulled myself onto a narrow ledge high above our ravine shelter. The helicopter was still far, sweeping the forest in long passes. They weren't looking in our exact direction yet. I needed to be seen. I tore off my jacket and waved it in frantic arcs above my head. My voice cracked as I yelled, "Help! Here! We're here!" I shouted until my throat burned, until I tasted blood. The helicopter continued its path, seemingly unaware. I refused to stop. I waved harder. I screamed until I felt dizzy. I jumped on the ledge despite how unstable it was. I didn't care about the danger. I cared about Sarah and Lily, about getting them home, about ending this nightmare. Finally, the helicopter shifted slightly, hovering. My heart slammed against my ribs. They were adjusting their angle, turning, coming closer. The sound of the blades grew louder, the wind they generated sweeping across the treetops. When the aircraft tilted toward me, I knew they had seen something. Maybe not me directly, but movement, something worth investigating. I fell to my knees, sobbing from exhaustion and relief. I waved once more, slower this time, but with all the hope I had left. The helicopter descended slightly and I saw a crew member lean out with binoculars. He pointed. My breath caught as the aircraft pivoted directly toward me. They saw me. I scrambled back down the ridge as safely as I could, not fast but urgent, trembling with adrenaline. When my feet finally hit level ground, I sprinted towards Sarah and Lily, shouting, "They're coming! They're here! They saw me!" Sarah gasped, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Lily, weak but aware, whispered, "Daddy, really? Really?" I said, dropping beside her and holding both of them. "We're going home." Moments later, the sound of the helicopter thundered above us, powerful and comforting. Ropes dropped through the canopy, and rescuers descended like angels in bright gear. I will never forget their faces when they saw us. Shock at our condition, relief that we were alive, urgency as they checked Lily first. She was dehydrated and dangerously weak, but she was fighting. Sarah clung to my arm as they helped us stand. "You kept us alive," she whispered. "No," I said, looking at her and then at Lily. "God kept us alive. I just refused to give up." When the rescuers lifted Lily into a harness and began hoisting her toward the helicopter, my knees buckled. Seeing her rising into the air, safe, finally safe, was the most beautiful and overwhelming thing I had ever witnessed. As we were lifted one by one toward salvation, the ravine grew smaller beneath us. The place that had nearly broken us had also revealed the depth of our love, our faith, and our resilience. And as the helicopter carried us away from the wilderness that had held us captive for 9 unforgiving days, I felt a single, powerful truth settle into my heart. We had survived. And survival, real survival, is a miracle no one walks away from unchanged. When we were finally flown out of that ravine and the forest disappeared beneath the helicopter, I remember holding Lily's hand and feeling her fingers squeeze back with the faintest strength. It was the kind of small gesture that can break a heart wide open. I sat there in that noisy cabin, watching Sarah lean over Lily, brushing the dirt from her face as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. In that moment, surrounded by rescue gear, rushing wind, and the stark realization that we had been saved, I felt something overwhelming settle inside me. A recognition that survival is never just about strength or skill. Sometimes it's about surrender, about acknowledging how small we are in the vastness of creation, and how fiercely God fights for us even when we're too weak to fight for ourselves. I thought about the nights I held Lily in my arms, praying she would make it until morning, the days I fed my family insects and tree sap while begging heaven for mercy, the hours I climbed those jagged rocks with my hands bleeding, and yet, when rescue finally came, it did not feel like the result of my effort alone. It felt like grace, like a miracle woven quietly through every moment we refused to give up, mercy stitched into every breath we kept taking, even when we didn't know if another one would come. In the days after the rescue, as we lay in hospital beds recovering from dehydration, infection, and exhaustion, I realized something profound. Sometimes God lets us walk through the valley not to break us, but to reveal what was buried under the noise of everyday life. When the doctors told me Lily would recover fully, I nearly fell to my knees again, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. Sarah held my hand and whispered that she felt changed, that those 9 days had stripped everything down to the truth of what mattered. We weren't thinking about bills or schedules or plans. We weren't worrying about the small arguments, the distractions, the trivial frustrations. In that ravine there was only love. Raw, fragile, fiercely determined love. And a faith that flickered even when the darkness felt absolute. And sometimes, that flicker is all heaven needs to send help. I realized that during our worst moments, God wasn't silent. He was holding us together when everything else was falling apart. Even the insects we found, the tree sap that kept Lily alive, the drizzle that collected on leaves, none of it felt random anymore. It felt like provision. It felt like a reminder that even when we are lost, we are never abandoned. And as I watched Lily sleep peacefully for the first time in days, I understood the weight of what we had lived. Survival wasn't just the end of the tragedy. It was the beginning of transformation. When we finally returned home, stepping into our house felt like stepping into a new life. The walls were the same, the furniture untouched, the world unchanged. But we weren't the same people who had left for a simple family hike 9 days before. Every sunrise feels different now. Every laugh from Lily sounds like the purest blessing. Every moment with Sarah feels like a gift I will never take for granted again. That ravine taught me that life is fragile, faith is powerful, and love, true love, is a force capable of enduring unimaginable hardship. And if there's anything I pray this story leaves with you, it is this. When everything seems lost, when the night feels endless, when you're clinging to hope by the thinnest thread, don't let go. Miracles rarely arrive loudly. Sometimes they come in the shape of a faint thumping in the sky, a stranger lowering from a rope, or a child opening her eyes after days of weakness. Sometimes they come simply because you kept believing, even when your strength was gone. We survived 9 days in a ravine on almost nothing but determination, love, and the grace of a God who never left us for a second. And if He could lead us out of that darkness, He can lead anyone out of theirs. Hold on. Don't surrender. Your miracle might already be on its way.